All right, we continue on our series on words of the Master Jesus. And of course, this is lesson 001. In our last lesson, we talked about our text for this message, which came from the book of Matthew, the 5th chapter. And we said, Matthew, the 5th chapter. And we said the verses we wanted you to read specifically was 1 through 13. And then, of course, we want you to read the whole book of Matthew, the 5th chapter. Let's continue as we're talking about the main point of our lesson is that we are the salt of the earth. And we're talking about Jesus from the point of view of where he came from. And, of course, we know that Jesus begat himself. He became what? The Christ at the resurrection. And there are two kinds of births that we're challenged to go through. As human beings, we come from our parents, and of course that creates our bodies, that creates our flesh and blood, our human self. And for the most part, we dwell on the past and we live in the past. We try to live in the future. It's impossible. Most of us never in the present. That's very difficult. And especially we don't get to know who we really are, and who we really are is spirit. And spirit is certainly long-lasting, everlasting, but most of us never discover that. The whole goal of Jesus Christ was to show us as humanity how to pass from one level to the next to a self-birth, or as I like to put it, we must give ourselves a rebirth, and we call that being born again. Being born again. And it really, really helps for us to understand this, that when we're born again, we're born into a new future in God. We move from the human self to the divine self, and we saw Jesus do that in the crucifixion that led to the resurrection. We must, as we are telling you here, we must beget ourselves into the spiritual realm of existence. We saw Jesus demonstrate to us the possibility. He had to die, and then he arose again, and we'll be celebrating that in times past and present on Easter. And we talked about Jesus' crucifixion here, and we talked about the whole idea that he was body. Now, the body is weak. The body is somewhat gross. It can be killed. And it will surely what? Die. We will surely die. There's no question about that. We can have a great life in this world, but if we want to live forever, if we want to be reborn in God, we have to get to the rebirth at some point in our life. And when we get to that rebirth, at that point, we are born again. But we're not born in our physical self, in our bodies. We are born as a spirit, and we're born from within ourselves. That's why the work that we do, the work that we must do, is internal work. It's not an outside job. It's an inside job. We're born into the world of the outside, but we have to find a way to go within. Now, in those early years of our life, as we talked about in some of our subsequent lessons, when we were talking about the pre-mind, you're a child, and certainly that's a natural state of innocence. That's why Jesus always made reference to children in his message. But the idea was that we had to make sure that we got to get into ourselves in a much deeper way, and we call that meditation or prayer. Let's look at a comparison that we can make, a very good comparison actually, that talks about the difference between grapes and wine. One of the first miracles that Jesus did was to turn water into wine. Now, grapes could be compared to the body, and sure enough, if you don't do anything with grapes, they're going to spoil, they're going to die, they're going to rot, and eventually we do the same thing as a physical self. But wine, often called spirits, when these grapes are turned into wine, they become a spirit. Now they're at the point where they can last or live forever. This is very symbolic, what Jesus was talking about, using grapes as an example. Grapes, older, once they die, just like our physical self, they become vulnerable to rot and decay. But once they're converted into wine, they can live forever. And not only, whereas they become vulnerable if they're not converted to wine, they become valuable if they're converted. If they're not, once they're converted into wine, they become valuable, and they get better and better over time. The Spirit is our true being, and it's through that Spirit that we can grow and experience all the good that God is. As we continue with our example, wine equals Spirit equals lasting forever. Lasting forever. The older, the more valuable. Just like wine. The older it gets, the better it gets. And it seems like over time that you can't have wine that's too old. The miracle of Jesus turning water into wine was that he was dwelling in the inner world. He was trying to help us see the power of the inner world. And in that inner world, that inside, that internal effort, it's sort of a metaphor, turning water into wine, but it's very symbolic. It's symbolic of eternal life. It's symbolic of life lasting forever. So this should be a pretty good analogy for you to compare wine with eternal life, grapes with the body, meaning that you can't sustain it over a period of time. No matter how you hope to keep those grapes, they will spoil. Even water over a long period of time will spoil. But if you compare eternal life to wine, it'll last forever. That's why he's making the comparison again with we are the what? Salt. That's why he used that term. The salt. Because salt comes from the sea. And we're mostly water, but salt adds flavor. And without salt in our life, we couldn't survive. So it's very symbolic, the message that we're talking about as the salt of the earth. That's the heavenly music that we're talking about. That is, even though it may be unsettling that the body is going to deteriorate and decay and going to die, and no matter what you do, you can't stop that process. But we certainly can be reborn into our spirit, get to know who we really are in God and who God really is in us. And it's because of that that we can live eternal. More in our next lesson.